So to sort of set the scene for a lot of my work, we're at a time where people have better tools for tracking what they do than ever before, right? So fitness trackers that they wear that go in their shoes, they can have wireless scales that upload and share automatically if they want. They have medical pillboxes that track things and can send them back to their clinicians. And they can go in online and look at detailed historical views of all of their data. But amidst all of this, we don't really have a lot of understanding about, once we collect the data as consumers, what should you do with it, who should have it, and how should people share it? So one of the ways that people are sharing it is through posts like this. And how many of you out there have seen a post, perhaps on Facebook, sharing their physical activity that looks a bit like this, maybe? Right, so if you've looked in your feeds, you've kind of seen some people sharing it. Sometimes they get comments. You know, they might talk about how much time they spent on the Stairmaster, how many calories they burned. They might share a complete detail of their run, including a map, which also includes things like their home address. And there's a lot of questions about what people are trying to get from this and how they're trying to, what they think will happen, and then is it actually, are these goals being met when they share? And then there's another kind of sharing that happens online where people share longer things with peers, where they talk a bit more about their frustrations, things that are maybe not going so well, right? So they feel like giving up, what's going on, can someone else help them? They haven't lost any weight, they're trying to. Or they're just worried, depressed, and upset. They've really been trying to be healthier and things aren't turning out very well, right? And when people are succeeding or when they're not, they often reach out to others for help. And so a lot of my work is on how people can turn to social software to help them adapt and maintain healthy behaviors, and how they can receive support from various people in their lives as they work through health and wellness challenges or manage chronic conditions. So particularly kind of the overview question in the research I'm going to talk about today is, how can social software best support people's health and wellness? And then using health and wellness applications as field experiment sites, what can we learn about social influence theory? So can we go back and learn about how people are influenced or persuaded by those around them? And you know, this is kind of an incredibly exciting time in terms of how people track and manage their health and wellness. There are thousands of applications available from mobile devices, online, and other spaces where they can go and interact with others about their health and wellness challenges, about their activity, and hope to get some form of support. But one of the problems with these applications is we don't really know, as a community, for whom these applications are working, whether they work, how much they work, when they work, when they're maybe harmful, or maybe when they're making people think they're doing something constructive but are actually just kind of doing the same. So in order to step back from those in my work, we've worked on some projects where we study how people use existing tools and what issues and challenges are that they face, as well as built some of our own tools that we've deployed to people to see what their experiences were and to see what went well and what didn't and what some of the outcomes were. So I'm going to start today by talking about a background study that colleagues and I did on how people use different online social spaces to meet their health and wellness needs. So what can each space do for someone? And after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some exploratory work where we actually built applications and went out and gave it to people and said, okay, how did this help? How did you use it? Where did things cause problems? You know, what's going on with the design of these applications that maybe could be better? And then I'll wrap up a bit by talking about some of the current work and some places where I see future challenges that I'm working on and hope that others can also join in and help us solve these. So to start with this background study, we looked at how people use various online health communities, such as peer support communities like Spark People, alongside online social network sites like Facebook or Twitter, to see how each different type of space met their needs. And this was, again, motivated by, you know, there's a lot of online social spaces out there that people are using. But it's hard to think about online social interactions without thinking of also the elephant in the room, Facebook. Right? So not specifically a health space, but when people talk about social online, they are often talking Facebook. And we know from previous research that these spaces give people different things. So already, before I came along, we knew that online health communities offer people emotional support, they offer them motivation and accountability, and they offer them experience-based information, so advice from people who have already been there or who have already worked through a challenge. It offers the opportunity to connect with peers anonymously at all hours. So you can post something at night and reveal a real struggle without having to reveal who you are, and by the time you wake up, you've got answers. And they commonly include features that support private messaging between individuals, forums where you can message the whole community or a subset of the community, a profile where you can tell other people about yourself, tracking tools where you can record your symptoms or how much weight you've lost or your physical activity, as well as produce content from experts that accompany the peer expertise. Facebook, by contrast, offers connections to your existing social network, so people that you know in some other context typically. And this can include strong and weak ties from a variety of social contexts. It can include your spouse, it can include your family members, it can include coworkers, it can include people you used to know. In general, if you're following the Facebook terms of service, you're supposed to use your real-world identity, though people do that to varying degrees. Some people use pseudonyms, some people don't. And you can connect with strangers, though, still through Facebook apps. So you can still use that system to connect with others who you don't already know. Common features here include messaging, groups, and profiles, as well as applications that add additional functionality on top of the existing Facebook platform. So in our work, we were motivated by saying, okay, people seem to be posting health content to both of these spaces, right? The online health communities are there for a reason, right, and people are using them. And we've seen these health posts in our Facebook feeds of our friends and things like that. So how do people use each? What do they want to get from each? What's each space good for? So to study this, we recruited participants who were members of at least one online health community and also Facebook. And they had to be active members, so they had to have posted at least 5 messages to that online health community in the past month. We recruited them from online health communities for weight loss and diabetes management. And with each participant, we engaged in a 90-minute interview with screen sharing so that they could go through their posts and activity on different sites and show us what they'd been doing. We recruited 14 participants, predominantly female, from communities such as Spark People, Fat Secret, 2 Diabetes, and one person who had their own personal blog where they talked about health concerns. Their primary health concerns included weight loss, weight maintenance, type 2 diabetes, and arthritis. Most of these people had been in the community for a while, though we had a range from people with a bit more tenure, so a few years, and people who had been there kind of more recently. So one of the things that we were really hoping to get from this study was an understanding of what people's goals were and what they did on the online health communities to meet them. In talking with them, we came up with sort of 4 goals that people tended to share: emotional support, accountability and motivation, advice, and impression management. So I'll run through each kind of briefly, just to talk about some of the ways that people were trying to accomplish these goals and what they were getting out of it, and how the different spaces met those needs. So for emotional support, people really valued the online health communities for this role, often over in-person support groups, because they could get feedback at any time, day or night. People talked about they'd post something and they could get a response right away. They wouldn't have to wait for a meeting. They wouldn't have to wait until it was a good time to call someone. They would also talk about how they could post something before they went to sleep after a rough day and know that they would wake up to a bunch of supportive messages and get the next day off on kind of a better footing. And they compared this a lot to their Facebook groups and said, well, if I post it to Facebook, I'm going to get comments from people who don't understand. They haven't been there, so they aren't going to really be able to be someone I can identify with. They're not going to support me in the way that I need. They might try to be helpful, but do so in a way that's sarcastic or actually act negative, or they just get an uninformed response, and that would hurt or at least make them feel more frustrated. They also talked about ways to get emotional support out of each space by choosing to be selective in the content they posted. So struggles weren't something that went to Facebook, they went to the online health communities. They didn't want people on Facebook knowing that their butt muscle hurt, that they were struggling, or they would frame messages differently for each community. So someone might post their details of a struggle to their online health community while posting a really brief update that says, I'm managing my symptoms, things are going really well on Facebook. It's just a way to kind of let their friends know that things were all right. So they had different types of sharing with each space. The second thing that people hoped to get out of this was accountability and motivation. So again, here, online health communities were really valued. Again, there was this sense of going through something together. So someone who was a part of Spark People talked about how their friends would check in on them, they'd make sure things were going okay. There was a sense of, we're going to go through this together, we're going to succeed. They all wanted someone to be successful. One downside, though, to these online health communities was that people were sharing with people who were otherwise strangers to them. They had no other connections, they didn't know them outside of the site. So if they left the site, no one would check up on them. There was no way that anyone would follow up. So that accountability would sort of fade if you didn't stop visiting. And so participant 8 in this study talked about how she had to actually go and recruit people to come to her personal blog and say, keep following me. If I stop posting, bug me, right? So that other people in her life would kind of keep her going because she didn't trust herself to stay participating in the online health communities. People also sought motivation. So they looked to role models, mentors, or competitions that they would try and one-up each other or collaboratively achieve a goal. And those were easiest in online health communities, again, because these were peers who had already been through it or were currently going through the same challenges. People talked about wanting to avoid people who would bring them down. That was a big demotivator. But at the same time, it was really nice to see peers also struggling so that they knew that it wasn't them that was at fault, it was just a hard challenge. And by contrast, they talked about their posts to Facebook. Again, they were posting more successes to Facebook as being something that they hoped would nudge or motivate their others. So they talk about, well, exercise isn't really a big thing in my family, but I'm hoping that I've started to take steps towards it, and I'm hoping that by sharing my physical activity on Facebook, I can motivate my sister, my cousin, my brother to start taking more accountability for their own health and get them going. So there, they weren't seeking motivation, they were looking to motivate their others who they knew. The third goal that came up often was advice. And advice was something that seemed to be really important early in a process, such as shortly after diagnosis or shortly after trying to take action. Here people would then go online and they'd be searching, they'd type something into Google, and they'd often land at a forum page, right? And they'd read it, they'd try and vicariously get advice from people who had asked questions before them. But once they were in, this wasn't why they kept coming back. Right? So it got them there, but then they'd come back for this social experience of feeling emotionally supported. So advice was kind of the gateway, and then emotional support seemed to be what kept people in a community. The other important place where advice came up was at some point people would need advice that they couldn't get vicariously, right? So if you, if you have a peer community and there are a lot of people going through the same struggle, there's a lot you can get just by reading what other people post and the responses to them. But at some point, your context or your challenges or your struggle are going to be different or sufficiently novel enough that the advice you're getting doesn't really apply to you, or you aren't sure that it applies to your life. So you have to share and actually create an account and talk about the details of your life to get feedback that's relevant to you. So advice was important at getting people in. It was important at getting people to first create that account. The fourth goal was impression management. And again, here, Facebook was a place to post successes, things that were going well. So to borrow a bit from Goffman, the idea of Facebook as a front stage where you perform your identity, you perform your successes. It's a space where, in the participants' words, was like a stand-up comedy routine. And they say, well, yeah, my life looks great to you, but trust me, I have problems. They just are something I talk about somewhere else. Facebook is about the things that are going well and how I want to be seen. And so when people were successfully managing health challenges or doing better than they had been, Facebook was a great space for that. It was somewhere where they could post something that they were proud of, that had gone well for them. They talk about how they're finally getting positive feelings. If they were someone who maybe hadn't been seen as physically active in high school, but now they could post, and for some reason they're friends with these people who were mean to them in high school, but they were, and they would post and they'd get support that they hadn't gotten, maybe from people who had teased them before. So this was kind of a chance to sort of redefine even one's identity and say, look, I'm not that person, I'm doing better than I ever have. By contrast, if you were the quarterback in high school and were not maybe as physically active now, this was a bit of a challenge, right? So you wouldn't necessarily want to be seen as, well, now I'm struggling with weight issues, I'm struggling with health concerns. So the concerns had to go somewhere else. And in this case, that was the online health communities, which were a backstage where people could let their guard down, be themselves, reveal the concerns, right? So be themselves, including all the things that you don't necessarily want the people who you're close to see. And they could do this without this fear of boring others or being judged, right? So they're your peers, they know that this is hard, they know they're in this space because they're concerned about this and want to talk about it. So it's okay to talk about the tedious things or the things that maybe would make the people on Facebook uncomfortable. So people had a bunch of strategies that they used in order to meet these goals. One of those was working to actively build and shape their network. So they'd join the online health communities to not feel alone. They'd find people who could motivate them and offer support, and they'd actively seek them out, right? And again, this was something that would require sharing. So they talk about how to find that mentor or that role model who's going to show you and talk with you about what it takes to succeed, you have to create a profile. You have to reveal something about yourself so that that matching can occur. And so again, this got them to create an account. It got them to populate a profile with details about themselves, right? If you don't share, no one's going to reach out to you. No one's going to know that you're there to even talk with. And once they had those friends, they would sometimes migrate them to Facebook. They'd add a connection there. This would let them feel more connected. They'd talk about how this made their friendship feel more real. It also increased accountability for that problem when you stop going to the peer support community, right? Well, now you're friends on Facebook, so they can still send you a message that you're going to see and say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. Are you still doing well? They also would stay connected to the community itself through their Facebook pages or identity there. And that was another way to just sort of have constant reminders even when they weren't actively seeking out information or advice. So overall, what we got from this study was that existing social network sites, we were kind of motivated, what's Facebook's role in this? We thought that people pretty well knew what the peer support role was, but we weren't sure what Facebook could or should be for meeting people's health needs. So the two things that emerged most strongly were that it was a place to get advice and support that is relevant to your context and personality, right? So the people on Facebook already know you. They can give you advice and comments that fit in your lifestyle, but there is a challenge that they aren't your peers, so it might not be relevant to the condition you're actually struggling with. The other important piece was that these are people whose opinion matters and with whom you have other contacts. So you care how your family sees you for most people. You care how your friends see you. So performing well there and showing successes was a great thing for people who were doing well. And it was also a reason to be more accountable when things were maybe not going as well. So after that study, we wanted to move on to see if we could build things or applications that were inspired by this and would take advantage of these opportunities for people. We built two interventions, and I'm going to briefly introduce the two interventions that we built and then talk about the findings across our deployment of them. So the first intervention is called 3 Good Things. It's based on a positive psychology exercise. The idea in 3 Good Things is that you record 3 things that happen to you that are good every day and the reasons why they happened. And by doing this, you can train yourself to be a bit more positive. You can dwell less on the negative, right? So people actually end up happier over the long term when they do this. Our idea was that perhaps by adding a social element to it, we could increase adherence, right? So if you're having conversations about those good things with people, it might be stickier. You might want to come back more. It might also increase its efficacy. So could having social interaction help your friends notice, hey, going to breakfast made Sean happy. Maybe we should go to breakfast more. Or even just having that conversation would make you dwell more on the positive than the negative, so you're kind of thinking more about what's going well. So to support this in a social setting, we built a Facebook app that included a structured interface for entering good things and the reasons. A lot of people forget to do reasons when they do this privately, but it turns out that it matters. And then they could go ahead and set the privacy, so it could be visible to their Facebook friends who are also using the application. It could be posted to their Facebook feed and visible to their friends. They could push it more broadly, or they could make it private, because not all good things needed to be shared, or would they would want to have them shared. We also built an interface where they could post directly from their newsfeed wall, so a lot of good things look like status messages anyway. I went for this great hike this weekend. Let me tell you about it. And this way, whenever they went to enter that, they could just tag it as, this is also a good thing, put it in the app. And then once they had good things, they could go back to their feed and look at their own good things and review them and reflect on them. They could also see good things from their friends. And when they clicked through, they'd get their friend's profile page and see what was happening there. And they could go ahead and actually, for some of these, none of them on this page, but for some they could go and comment on their Facebook page to have that social interaction with their friend. We also tried to build in that accountability feature. So if you went to your friend's page and they hadn't posted a good thing in 3 days, they'd get a prompt. Paul hasn't posted in 3 days, send him a nudge. And if you clicked that, it would send a message through Facebook's notifications interface that says, hey, Sean's a little concerned, have you posted good things lately? Stay with the application, stay active, right? So you had the accountability built in and automatically supported. We were really interested in the effects of sharing, and so we decided that a way to test that would be to deploy it with 2 different sharing defaults. So some people had it set so that it would share with their Facebook newsfeed, so every one of their friends who was on Facebook by default. And for others, it would be private by default, so only they would see it. And we decided to deploy the application through an open enrollment process, so anyone who found the app could try it. They just get randomized to a default. We also ran some Google ads to help get people in there, as well as some Facebook ads. And we signed people up from summer 2009 to spring 2010. We didn't compensate them to try it. We wanted to see what they would do with the application just on their own. But we did offer people $20 if they would participate in an interview with us after they'd used it for a while. And at sign up, they completed a demographic questionnaire. We had 190 people sign up during this time. We considered them active if they posted at least twice, at least a week apart. So post twice, come back a while later, rather than just post twice at once. So only 55 of those 190 actually met that criteria. We interviewed 6 of them. Unfortunately, because of the way we set up the study, people who stopped participating were lost to follow-up. We didn't have a way to invite them to interview. So that's something we've learned for future studies. On average, they were about 37 years old, again, predominantly women. All right, so that's a brief overview of 3 good things. It was a positive psychology exercise where we added technological support to support social features around the good things with the idea that it might increase adherence and efficacy. And we ran it as a field deployment with open enrollment, and we had the use logs and interviews with users to learn from. The second intervention we built was called Goalpost, and this was a goal setting and self-monitoring application for physical activity. It was an iOS application. It included features for journaling. It included a trophy case where people could get rewards. They let them look back on their previous weeks to view when they were most active and how they'd done towards their goals. And then they could, since this is a talk about sharing, share it on Facebook. When they clicked through to share it, they had a choice of at what level of detail they would share, so there were some default messages. And then once they selected those, they could go ahead and edit that message to include exactly the content that they wanted. They could add some more positive or neutral things or negative comments about their performance. And then they could go through and share it. And when they shared, they had the opportunity to share with either their entire Facebook newsfeed or whatever their default was, or a support group that the application let them create. So just people who they thought might be receptive to this comment and give them the reaction that they wanted. In piloting, some people also told us that they had concerns about Facebook, the company, having access to this information and these details. So we gave them the option to share the details on a page that we hosted that would stay outside of Facebook's content system. Right? So if their concerns were not about their friends knowing it, but about Facebook, the company, they had a way to sort of distinguish between those 2. And then once they posted, it would show up in their feed with their name, their picture, right, and optionally any trophies if they'd achieved their goals for that week, and a summary, and people could go in and comment. To study this application, we recruited 23 subjects from the Seattle metro area. This was gender balanced. We chose people from the contemplation, preparation, or action stages of the trans-theoretical model, so we wanted people who had at least decided they were going to do something about their physical activity and were actively trying to increase it. We gave 12 of them a version of the application that included the sharing feature, and 11 a version that didn't. We had set this up again as an experiment that was controlled. We recruited participants who are 21 to 49 years old, and we deployed it for a 4+ week field trial, so most used it for about a month. At the beginning, they came to the office. We installed the application on their own phone so that we knew that so they weren't learning the phone at the same time as they were learning the application. We had 5 intra-study surveys where we asked them about the application, who they'd shared the information with, whichever condition they were in. And then they came back for semi-structured interviews after the study where we asked them about their experiences with the application. All right, so that's the second application. It was Goalpost. We built it, deployed it for 4 weeks with 23 participants. 12 of them got the sharing features, 11 didn't. And what did we learn from each? So first, kind of the quantitative overview of how people used the sharing or didn't. So perhaps unsurprisingly, defaults mattered. So in 3 good things, we gave people either the private default or the public default. People in the private default tended to leave things private, though they would go and make some things public. in the public default, actually about half of them would make their posts semi-private, so visible either only to other friends who were using the intervention or entirely private. So the default, people left it in whatever it was for the most part, but with the tendency towards moving things to be more private. This, however, didn't have any impact on their post frequency or retention, so whether or not the social feature was more or less social had no impact on whether or not they actually posted often and how long they stayed with the application. In goal post, 10 of the 12 in the sharing condition shared at least once, so that was encouraging. But there were some issues with that. 4 of those people shared only with an empty support group. In other words, they shared it with their support group, but they were the only person who could actually see it on Facebook, which was curious to us. And the others talked a lot about being limited by fears of violating norms of Facebook, revealing weaknesses, or appearing boring or boastful. So the same things that came up in the previous study. 3 did configure a support group, so they asked people to come in and participate and respond to their comments. And I'll talk a little bit more about how they use that later. But sort of the first takeaway for us was that we had this design process or research process. We were going to adapt an intervention or design a new one that was going to leverage the internet's affordances, in this case, the opportunity for social features. We'd pilot it, we did that with people, and then we'd do a controlled lab trial or a controlled field study and see how much this social feature mattered, and then we'd make some causal inferences about how much social matters. But it turned out that even with all that piloting that we'd done, we got the social features somewhat wrong, and we were actually in kind of a different stage of the process where we were piloting the app, we were refining it, we should have done an open beta, and we did our interviews and analysis to learn kind of how the feature worked and didn't work, but we hadn't done the repeat until compelling. So the sharing feature sort of broke down in both of these. So we didn't learn what we wanted to. We didn't learn how much sharing helps or exactly what effect it has on adherence or retention or efficacy in either of these cases. But we did learn a good amount about how these features might be designed and where they cause problems. And since these features are really very prominent in a lot of the consumer tracking applications, I think there's an opportunity here to design them better than they currently are. So to sort of recap what we thought and what others knew about sharing as a nudge or as a tool that would help people make behavior changes. It helps people receive emotional support. If you share what's going on, whether it's a success or negative, you have the opportunity to have people react and support you. It creates this opportunity for accountability and motivation, right? You can set a goal and people will say, all right, stick with it. And it also creates an opportunity for advice. But it creates a lot of challenges with building, shaping, and selectively accessing the network. So for any given piece of content, who should it go to? How should you frame it? And if you get it wrong, you might violate the norm of a space, right? Which is, then you might lose friends, they might hide your posts, they might unfollow you, or things like that. And then that impression management concern runs across both categories. So when things are going well, it's an opportunity to communicate successes and show off who you want to be. When things are not going as well, it's really difficult to manage an impression and show off kind of how you want to be seen while still meeting your health needs by revealing the weaknesses or getting the support that you need, right? So impression management was both an opportunity and a challenge here. And at about the time that I was thinking this through, 2 posts in my own Facebook feed sort of summarized this pretty well. So I was looking at it, and someone had posted that they had just completed a run on Runkeeper. I was like, oh, another one of these posts. I wonder if they're getting what they want out of this. Is this meeting their goals? And then the post directly above it was someone resharing George Takei's picture of the most important man in the world saying, I don't always go to the gym, but when I do, I tell Facebook, right? So in this case, these 2 friends didn't know each other, so they didn't see each other's posts. But had they known each other, I suspect the first person might have gotten the message that maybe their post wasn't so welcome on Facebook, that it was being perceived wrong or not really the way they wanted it to be. And I'm pretty sure that the first person who shared their run was either hoping to sort of celebrate it with someone or talk about a good day or let people know it was up with them, maybe even get an advice for a new route. But that's not really how it came across to the person resharing this, who saw it as perhaps boastful or problematic. And so overall, people seem to have this limited sharing where they're scared of violating norms, Or they aren't scared and they go right ahead and violate the norms of the space. They're scared of revealing weaknesses to the wrong people, or they don't want to appear boring or boastful, right? Either too tedious or like they're trying to celebrate something that's not that big of a deal. And our participants told us a lot about how this kind of broke down for them. So they'd compare these activities from physical activity trackers to things like Farmville that would make people wince when they saw them, right? The spammy Facebook updates. And their thing was, you know, even if posting this might get me some support, I'm a little concerned that I'm going to actually just get winced about. I'm going to cause these other people discomfort. They're going to think poorly of the kind of things that I post. The other challenge for people is that for someone who's struggling to be active, more active than they have been, a 20-minute run might be a really big success, right? It might be the kind of thing that you do want to share and celebrate, but then you post it, and by the way, some of your friends ran the marathon last weekend, and so now they're going to tell you to go out and run a marathon, right? So you want to celebrate, and they're just already raising the bar on you, right? And something that looks like a really nice achievement for you is trivial to someone else, and you're not going to get the reaction that you want. And so while we had high hopes for these features, and actually a lot of our participants coming into the study did as well, they didn't really plan out as we had hoped, right? So one user was talking about how she thought Facebook was going to save her, right? This was the thing that was going to make her be more active, and she'd tried several applications before this. And the answer was no, it didn't make any real difference. And she was discouraged, and we were discouraged, right? And we were particularly discouraged because we're looking at all these features in mobile applications right now. There's a lot of applications out there using this. Are a lot of people hoping that this is going to work, and is it failing for all of them, or what's happening here? But amidst that discouragement, people did want something social, right? And there were some encouraging signs. So of the 55 active 3 Good Things participants, 24 did invite other friends to use the app, and 25 looked at their friends' profiles, right? They did want to see and support each other. Of the 4,000 page views during our study, 660 were of Friends Good Things. This was the second most popular page after your own profile. And in just that 4-week study, one of the 12 Goalpost users found a new exercise partner and started going to the gym more, right? So for some people, it was working. And they talk about how when it worked, they'd get a ton of comments. They'd feel really good, right? So having it out there meant something, and they got the buzz that they wanted. And so when it went well, it could go really well. But when it went poorly, it was not encouraging. People would talk about posting. It would have been great to have someone reacting. They'd have great to have a little bit more of a reaction, but they're putting stuff out there, and it's just into the void. And people would talk about, maybe what made for a good reaction. Oh, accepting people, right? So someone who wouldn't get sick of your posts, who wouldn't be annoyed, right? And so they'd cultivate that network for people who maybe used Farmville a lot, so they can look at my runs. And when people looked and had their friends look or comment on their things, they'd feel good. They'd be like, yep, someone's looking at it. I'm being validated, right? I'm getting the support here. But in this case, this was someone who had configured a support group and had actually emailed all of them at the beginning of the study and said, you're in my support group. Please look at it. Please support me. But only one of those people actually ever did. And for the rest, including one of them who was her husband, she was kind of annoyed, right? And felt like they weren't giving the support that they wanted, right? And this was really tough for them, right? Having the sharing feature had created an expectation. They'd even asked people, but it wasn't going through. When we looked at the data, one of the interesting things that happens here is that she had a very small support group, and of any post you make on Facebook, about 1 of 3 of your friends sees it, so about 30%. So it's possible that that friend who commented was the only one of those people who ever knew that she posted, right? For the others, the Facebook feed rank just didn't put it there. So there's also this disconnect between her model of who was seeing it and who actually was seeing it. So for her, no comments meant, oh, they saw it and they didn't care. What may have actually happened was one person saw it and cared. The other people never had a chance to care. So we kind of got left with this mixed reaction of there's some potential, right? There's a reason these are being built into applications. There's a reason people are using them. But gosh, it sure doesn't seem like they're always meeting people's goals the way that they should. And sometimes they set this expectation that's even higher than not having the feature would be. And when it fails, it's actually discouraging for people. So in my current work, we're still trying to deal with this challenge of how do you design these features in a way that helps reliably meet people's goals, and how do we get the sharing features right so that people actually find them compelling and useful. And one of the ways that we've been doing that, or thinking about that, is we originally designed the sharing features around the idea of privacy, right? So some things might be a little risky to share, right? They might be sensitive, so you shouldn't overshare it. And this was great for protecting information, but it wasn't really great with this idea of getting things right for the norms of a space or getting it in front of the right people. So instead, we've redesigned the applications with this idea of appropriate self-casting. How do you share these things about yourself fairly broadly in a way that you get the reaction that you want and that isn't going to piss off your friends? And so to make that a little more concrete, the top row is the original 3 Good Things application, which was all about pushing content to your friends. We thought that any of the commenting that was going to happen was on the Facebook main feed and not within our app. So we didn't really even include affordances for peer sharing or peer support. The redesigned application still lets people push content to Facebook so they can share that exceptionally good thing to their friends on Facebook. But it also includes a space for peer support, so we're interweaving the two. In this one, we're still refining the design. We're testing it. You're welcome to try it out and let us know how it works for you. We're hoping to do a test of this one kind of coming around January once we've got the redesign and implementation done. And I did say implementation, so the caveat is that if you try it now, it might break tomorrow, but we're working on it. Another area is I've got moved to sort of particular cases where we say that social should help you achieve something. So a common bit of conventional wisdom is that if you share a goal, you're more likely to meet it, right? You tell people about it, now you're on the hook, you have to go through and follow through. More recent work says that this might not actually be the case. If you share a goal that you're a marathon runner, or you're going to climb Mount Everest, or you're going to grade all your papers tonight, your friends start treating you like you're this person who's on top of it, you're going to run, you're a mountaineer, you're someone who does all your grading really early. And you never actually have to follow through, right? You just get all these social benefits right away, and so you're not on the hook. So we've been testing this with the feature that lets people go out and share their walking goals or not share them in one of the conditions, and we're seeing what the actual effects are on people's walking behavior. And the other thing we're trying, based on what we learned here, is actually encouraging people to explicitly ask for something, right? So if they don't succeed, they go ahead and post, push me to do better next week, right? Like, you're actually asking, what you want from people rather than assuming that they will infer that you want support. So the thing that looks like a boast might instead come across as, oh, they're looking for help, and so that people can respond accordingly, right? And we're putting that as a pre-populated field in so that people know to ask. And then there's a bunch of other future challenges coming up that I'm hoping that some of which we're working on now, some of which I'm hoping that others will take on. So one of them is getting the right things in front of the right people, right? So through feed rank algorithms, when you share on Facebook, can you get a support-seeking post to people who are actually supportive rather than your most sarcastic and cynical friends? Or can we let you view things in topic or need-based lenses? And this is also something that Facebook is currently testing, where they're seeing if letting people view something on a particular topic will get people more of the reaction that they want. So can you match content to the people who will react in the way that you're hoping for? There's this other challenge of getting the right content in front of the right people in the right form, which is if you look at a lot of the consumer data, we're building life logs of detailed, at 5-minute intervals, how active were you? That's just really not that practical to go back and look at, right? So if you look at your Fitbit data or this Moves app that records your steps and where you were at any given time in the day, it's not necessarily obvious what the opportunities are for behavior change if you look at it yourself. It's not entirely clear what's interesting to share, and you have to sort of mine it yourself. There's the opportunity to do a lot of this better. One of the things that I've started on in the past year, and it's kind of at this nascent stage, is how do we get this data that consumers are collecting in front of clinicians and practitioners in a way that's useful, right? So what data should they see? How should it be presented in a way that doesn't take too much of their time in, but they can still give meaningful expert advice on? Who in clinical practice should see it? Should it be your primary care physician? Should it be a nutritionist at your HMO? How can it best be integrated into workflows so that it's not creating an additional burden, but instead helping deliver more efficient care? And then there's the whole issue of Ehr integration, which is all steeped in policy and business decisions that make this even more of a challenge. Kind of all of that is in this category of getting the right content in front of the right people in the right format that they can actually do what you want. In parallel to that, there's this, how do you help people craft the right content when they choose to share? So if they're asking for support, maybe we need to tell them, like I said, that actually tell your friends you want support or advice. Tell them what you want here so that they don't give you the different thing. People actually often share with this idea that people just know what they want or react. It turns out that people still can't read minds. So when people write posts, they could be coached, and they might also be coached when they reply to others. So if someone starts to give that sarcastic reply of, now go run a marathon, the system might intervene and say, wait, let's remember that your friend just started running for the first time. Is this really what you want to say? And then as I talked about, people have this kind of broken mental model of how the Facebook feed works, where they think they post it, all of their friends see it, anyone who didn't reply or like it doesn't care about them. It's wrong. It only goes to about 1/3 of those people. And helping that people understand how the system works so that they have the right expectations can help people not be discouraged when things don't necessarily go for some unreasonably high goal. Right? So correct mental models of how sharing works in applications is really important. And then on the online health community side, there's an opportunity to help people create rich profiles so they can get advice about that is relevant for them and match them to the right peers more automatically. Right now they have to sort of recreate everything they've posted elsewhere online. A lot of these pages are, they give you a rich space to share, but it's a little bit ugly maybe. And then there's also the opportunity, they're already using forums to help match people according to others who are over 50 or others who have the same interest. But this can also all be done better and help match people to peers who can give you relevant advice. They've both been there and their life context is similar, so they know what will or won't work for you. So to wrap it up, I think online social networks and sharing features have this incredible potential for helping people meet their health goals. We're building it into applications on the assumption that they do, but there's a lot of ways that that breaks down. It creates sort of false expectations about what's actually going to happen if you choose to share, and there are a lot of ways to help people share more effectively so that those goals are met, and doesn't really hit these same barriers of violating norms or having things go wrong as often. And so I'm working on it now. I'm hoping that others will kind of join in. I'm new to UW and also always looking for people who want to work on this. And with that, I just want to say thanks to you all for coming out. Thanks to some really fantastic collaborators on this and funders from Intel and the University of Michigan. Yes?
So one of the things that has been sort of been more obvious to the medical community since sort of what we call the Googleification of medical stuff is the quality of information that's necessarily available out there isn't always the greatest. And I think so my question is, in the typical online healthcare community, let's say a type 2 diabetes place that someone went, when people are searching for peers and looking for advice on I can't manage my blood sugar, I would imagine that some of these things may have moderators where, the worst of the worst stuff, abusive comments or trolls or something like that can get filtered out. But what if someone says, eat a bunch of bananas, it's great for diabetes? That's not immediately obvious maybe to a community, but it would, to the community that may be on there, that maybe it's a bad idea. Or maybe there's stuff that's a little bit different. What if someone starts saying, well, actually, take 2 of your metformins, or double your insulin, when in fact it's just some person there. How does this the online health community sort of deal with vetting the quality of the interaction that's going on?
Yeah, so how do online health communities deal with quality of information, particularly accuracy or credibility of information? They deal with it in different ways. Some deal with it by building features in that will let people sort of show off how well they've done at managing a condition, right? So weight loss or their A1C levels are in their profile, right? So that sort of says this person has really good A1C levels, they might be a credible source. And they might still be, we were just talking earlier about how people find the wrong patterns all the time, right? So they might still be giving terrible advice, but happen to have had things turn out well. So that's one way. Others do use moderators. Others really try and parallel the peer support with expert advice or columns so that even if you have lower quality information existing in the forums, that at least you have this professionally produced content from experts alongside of it that you can turn to. Some do moderation, but again, as you point out, the moderators may not always be in a position to know. It's not something that I've worked on, but there are others who are really, it's an acknowledged problem that information credibility for all sorts of things in peer communities is potentially, it's not always the best place to go for informational support. For emotional support, it's great, but the informational side can be a challenge.
So I've not really been involved in social networking. I'm kind of averse to it because have the sense it takes a lot of time, and I guess I have this impression that a lot of the people on there are on there, as you said, either because they want attention from their friends or they want to complain or something. But if what you want to do is use these as tools for intervention, do you think you should study people who both use social networking and those who don't, but who are committed to like making a change, to see kind of more independently of the population whether the tool itself can evoke that change? Is that something, a direction you might go in?
Yeah, so should we study people who both want to use and already are using social network sites and people who are not using them but still want to make change?
Correct, as a health intervention.
Right, I feel like the easy answer is yes. For a lot of it, I think a lot of it is trying to fit interventions into people's lives in a way that also meets their other goals. So if you're someone who, right, if you want to interact with friends around your successes and problems, the social features are good. I'm not sure that we should try and get people who that's something they avoid and don't want into a social feature, right? So there's a lot of this tailoring taken to the next level of how do we actually match the right intervention to the person, not just the content in the intervention, that is work to be done. So some of the things we've started doing actually are collecting Big Five personality inventory for every person who enters our study to see if we can start finding patterns between for whom they work and for whom they don't. A group in, I think in New York has done some work not on health applications, but looking at like introversion and extroversion, and even little differences in application design, such as showing the number of people, and it's a large number or a small number on a site, one will bring out the extroverts, the other makes the introverts, while making the introverts run away. The other feature makes the introverts come out and the extroverts kind of say, oh, this isn't the space for me. So being able to actually tailor the interface or even the whole intervention to match what someone is going to find enjoyable or pleasant to use is, I think, an important direction to go. And being able to do it automatically is a challenge. I'm not sure that we should try and drag people to a social intervention when that's not going to work for them, but knowing for whom a social intervention would be appropriate is probably valuable.
So I'm just curious, are there like sort of less than scrupulous people who kind of insert themselves into these sites to try to sell quack type products to people who are fairly desperate because of their health conditions?
Yeah, so are there unscrupulous people who try and basically spam people into buying products that are useless? It's not something that I've seen, and it may be because the moderators at the sites we've looked at are really good. It's certainly something I've heard anecdotes about, that anywhere on the internet that you can have a spammer, you will have a spammer. And unfortunately, they'll often prey on like people's needs or desperation. So I'm sure there are people, but I think that's somewhere where both automatic software and spammers, at least, or moderators, catch a lot of the worst of it. Yeah.
So I saw that you showed some Fitbit data, and then you talked briefly about Ehr integration. I'm wondering if you have a sense on how satisfied people are and how they respond to sharing data versus goals and other complaints. Is that something that they're really interested in doing?
So just to double check, are you thinking of sharing your Fitbit data and goals with your clinician or with others? Or?
Just what you've seen, how have people responded differently to those, and what do they get out of it in comparison?
So we haven't actually directly compared goals versus sharing data. One of the students I've been working with just did a study on sharing the finely grained Fitbit data, and for basically no one was it useful. Right? They kind of talked about how they kind of wanted to get something out of it. They wanted advice, but they couldn't even make sense of their own life log to figure out where they should make change, and they didn't expect their friends or their clinicians to. So this is another area where I think that the system creates an aspiration. People track more and more data with the hopes that it will help them improve. But for a lot of people, the actual interface of looking at that has a long way to go before it gives you useful information. Yes?
Can you make sure you repeat the question into the mic? Thanks.
Sure.
So do you think that there's differences, like if you were to bin people by sort of generations, the millennials, and that the reasons people do this and the outcomes would be different? The thing I'm thinking of, I quite like the idea of posting a goal, but I could see that, people already talked about how there's generational differences in adherence to that kind of thing. So if you were to divide your data up like that, would you be able to see those kind of differences?
Yeah, so would we see generational differences between for whom this works or whether or not the application the social features are appealing? I'm pretty sure we would. I think that we haven't had large enough subject pools until the study that we're actually running right now, where we can look at the age effects. The other challenge with it is that at the same time as there are also generational pools, there's also the fact that these are fairly new spaces where the norms are evolving. So something that was true of what was appropriate to post on Facebook a few years ago may not be true in a few years from now, because they'll change the feed, they'll change what gets featured, they'll change the way that you can look at the feed, so that posting something that is more personal about health might be too broadcasty now, but with the appropriate topic filters could change it. So I think that there's kind of two challenges here, is that norms are evolving, and also that different age groups have different norms right now, so it's not monolithic for anything. Yes?
So given that in the Facebook example, you're kind of a captive of the platform, and the platform has its own interests, whatever those are, it seems like the solution that's going to have the highest likelihood of succeeding is going to be aligned with the interests of the platform. And so how can you explicitly design a strategy that basically, when it boils down to it, makes Facebook money?
Right.
So that Facebook wants people to see the feed, and people to participate, people to meet their goals, even though those goals are of secondary importance to Facebook. How do you align the interests of your project with the platform?
Right, so Facebook's a company, they want to make money. How do we build applications that support their goals so they're kind of permissive of where we are and also still help people? If we think, and I think it's probably true that some level of user engagement can make some applications stickier or more effective. We don't know necessarily which ones and how yet. User engagement is something that Facebook really likes, right? You know, they can put ads next to it. Getting people to reveal weaknesses there, right? Then you can put ads that sell them things. So even scrupulous people will try and sell things online. So I think there's I think that what we're doing is not misaligned. Facebook would probably prefer that these things happen in their space than not. Some of the ways that it breaks down are when Facebook does things like encourage, they had from a Facebook designer, there was a New York Times editorial a couple of years ago that said every site on the internet should be using our comments, right? Because it's real world identity, people will be more civil to each other, and they'll post more thoughtful things if they're stuck with their real world identity in your forum. And yeah, that's true in a lot of cases, but when we're talking about getting people to reveal health weaknesses and challenge, that's totally inappropriate in a lot of situations. And so I think it's sort of, some things belong on that platform and are well aligned. So where does real world identity matter? Where are the affordances of the platform going to support what we're trying to achieve in our intervention? Versus where does the platform's expectations, terms of service or requirements actually cause problems for the kind of behavior we want to encourage? And those should be built somewhere else. Another way that things can break down when you build on a platform is that features change. And it breaks down for research and practice. So in 3 Good Things, in addition to the privacy default condition, we actually had it was a 2x2 design where we also were testing the push notification, or the notifications and accountability feature. So some people got that, some people didn't. About halfway through the study, Facebook turned off the notifications API, so we could no longer send notifications, therefore deprecating one of our treatment groups. So it's, there's also just like here, having a conversation of if we'd only shown how useful that was, maybe we could have said, well, wait, is there another way to do this? Or if a lot of people had shown it, not just us. So I think part of it is just getting word out there of what we need when we're building applications and how it's useful so that those features keep existing or can be improved. Right.
Mark, do you have a question? Oh, I think we're out of time, I think. So just the last question, in the end, we're, as a healthcare institution, sharing all this data through people's patient portals, and we hope that it's improving their health. Is there any way we can figure out if sharing this data actually really is improving people's health, or if it's just something that the government's mandating us to do and we're doing it?
Right, so does sharing all this data back from the clinical side to the patient side help people? Does it make them healthier? And can you measure that? There are a lot of things that people decide to do that you wish you had been rolled out as controlled experiments. If we brainstormed around it, I think we could probably come up with ways, perhaps technological literacy and whether or not people who are engaging more with it have better outcomes, but then there's confounds of, well, they might also go to WebMD more or things like that. So it's, not everything in the world is set up to support our research, which can be frustrating.